Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon when you're watching this, and hopefully you have a chance to watch it before we meet again on Monday. Want to apologize right up front. I had every intention of getting these webinars to Sam sometime last week, and then I had an issue with some travel and couldn't complete while I was on the road, and then GoToMeeting had a 2-day hiatus where their system was down and I couldn't get to it. So I do apologize, and I'm hoping that if you have a chance to review these before Monday, certainly that will help, and it'll also be kind of as an archive that we can go back to from time to time. So really excited to see everybody again on Monday. I really appreciate the time and effort and all the follow-up that several of you have put in. I've tried to do my best to reply to emails, and I'm going to do so throughout the weekend before we head into Monday's day 3. But I wanted to take a chance and just review some points from day 1 and 2. And certainly this particular webinar doesn't have any specific stopping points where I sometimes add reflection questions and things of that nature. But please plan any time to pause the recording and make some notes or just kind of gather your thoughts. So I'm going to just jump right into that kind of opening point that I mentioned when we were together on days 1 and 2, that any assessment really comes down to 3 points: purpose, evidence, inference. And the more that we can use purpose, evidence, inference as our guide in terms of how we drive any assessment for what we want to find out, the evidence we gather to make a quality inference. We're not going to be able to make a determination completely every time, but we can certainly make some strong inferences to make instructional adjustments. And that's what we're looking to do here in the CFA process. Kind of reviewing again, just a couple of overarching points. A common formative assessment is an aligned pre and post assessment within a unit that hopefully can be collaboratively designed. And certainly several of you are working independently because you've come to this 4-day workshop and seminar on your own, or you are the only science teacher in your department or in your school, and that happens, which is unfortunate in a small setting. But in a way, it also might align some consistency from one grade level to the next, as long as that assessment has the right amount of rigor and accuracy to the standard. So it's not necessarily bad or good; it's just a different situation. These are administered to students throughout the year, and more importantly than predicting external assessment results, which certainly they can, and that's a filter, is they empower us as teachers to make the right kind of instructional adjustments. And they really are designed for a particular set of intentional learning intentions for one unit of study. What do students know? What do they need to learn? And what are the intentions that I need to convey to the students for that particular unit? And that's why some of you had longer units, and I really pushed us into that 2 to 4 week time frame as much as we could, so we can make the right kind of decisive instructional adjustments along the way. To review a little bit of what we covered on days 1 and 2 is really what's in blue. And we identified the priority standard, unwrapped big ideas, and then began to create the post-assessment questions. And that's what I'm going to kind of highlight in this session. I felt like we did a very haphazard and quick run through, and I take all the blame and responsibility for that when I say that in terms of scoring guides. I felt like we went through that kind of fast, and that's where we're going to start on days 3 and 4. But certainly it's a chance to jump into that when we come back together. And then creating that pre-assessment, we can start thinking about that now, but to be honest, that sometimes comes at the end of days 3 and 4. When we've created the entire unit, we go back and look at what might we really want to have in our pre-assessment. So I'm just going to review some of the steps we covered. The first thing is the idea of a prioritized standard selection. Standards that have endurance, readiness, and leverage. Things that will stand the test of time, endurance. Readiness from one grade level or course to the next. And this is where I really appreciated some of the groups that looked at their vertical alignment, what should happen between 6th, 7th, and 8th, or what should happen between biology and chemistry. Leverage is between one course to another, and that's where anytime students are going to explain or describe, they're going to have to do it in written form or spoken form. So there's a great opportunity to tie to literacy standards, and certainly in science, there's several places where mathematics has to come into place. My gosh, in physics and chemistry so many times, but even in biology, when we look at probability and what's that alignment to math standards, and when we can look at even some of the standards of mathematical practice, and there's times we need to attend to precision. Certainly we'll consider external exams, and as we talked a little bit about, we don't have the full science assessment set in South Dakota, so we're going to prepare for that as it comes, but what we're looking for is not a teaching to the test mentality as much as it is making sure we prepare our students for what's going to be expected of them on an external assessment, so that way the formatting or the questions, or if we know certain amounts of content are going to be included, that we don't shy away from making sure that there's that alignment. Then we talked a little bit, and as a footnote, if you're watching this webinar quickly and I go through any slide too fast, I'm trying to minimize the amount of time. I'm going to send Sam the slides as well. We talked a little bit about which one of these could be the priority, and several of us made some really good reasons why. It would be our interpretation of developing a model or making observations. The key, most importantly, is that when we design our assessment, whatever is our priority for that assessment, it's an opportunity for us to focus our attention on how much our assessment items gather evidence for that and the instructional feedback we provide to students. So if we were to determine that developing a model was our priority, and to do that, we could have students make observations or conduct an investigation to do so. Our focus on developing a model that describes that matter is made of particles too small to be seen, that's the focus of our unit. That doesn't mean that we've picked a poor priority standard. It just means for that unit, I need to focus my attention there on the assessment items, my instructional adjustments, and the feedback I provide students. So while they might conduct an investigation, the feedback I provide them about their investigation is less than the topical element about matter being particles too small. If my priority is conducting the investigation and about determining whether the mixture of two substances results in new substances, and that's my focus and my priority, then while I might be using developing a model to support it, I'm not going to focus as much of my attention there, especially on the day-to-day instructional adjustments. But our supporting standards are important. They are taught within the context of the priorities, and I just gave a very quick example of that. And they can help become those instructional scaffolds to help students understand and attain more of the comprehensive priority standards, because they help become the building blocks for how they discover that. And it's very possible in many of our standards in South Dakota, but also similar to the next generation science standards. In one unit, one would be a priority. In the next unit, the other one would be a supporting, and vice versa. Next piece, just to review, is that importance of the unwrapping. And so when we do the unwrapping, we're simply looking first at the verbs, the procedural knowledge: plan, carry out, and provide. After that, we want to make sure we identify all the nouns or noun phrases. What are the stuff the students are going to have to know that they're going to use the skills to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of those concepts? And so as we talked a lot about how, first and foremost, our unwrapping has to be very true to the standard. We don't add anything in here. So on the left-hand side, those were just the nouns or noun phrases. And even though materials was the noun, vibrating materials was really the important element of that. And then they're going to have to plan an investigation, carry out an investigation, and provide evidence. We talked about that building from blooms into depth of knowledge. And the DOK is where we really want to push our thought process around looking at the level of rigor. The difference there is depth of knowledge, and we'll review this a little bit when we come back, is not a taxonomy. We don't necessarily build as we do in Bloom's taxonomy. Depth of knowledge just identifies where the students will need to demonstrate understanding of those concepts at the right level of rigor to be proficient for that standard. And I went ahead and just added another example of that leverage, a Common Core ELA literacy standard to integrate visual information with other information in prints and digital text, which is what students might do to demonstrate how they identified what the small particles were when they completed their investigation. Same process here. Left-hand side, we have our knowledge, our skills, our knowledge and our concepts. What will the student do with that? The verbs. Integrate what? The visual information, and then integrate the print. Integrate was really the only verb from that particular standard. And then we talked a little bit about why this could really guide when we unwrap the level of depth we put into our assessment items. If we have DOK 1, there's only going to be one correct answer. DOK 2, there's usually one correct or probable answer, but it does require that justification. So it could be a short constructed response. DOK 3, there's always more than one right answer, so we're going to usually have a constructed response, which will almost always involve a scoring guide. Then the other big piece that we addressed on days 1 and 2 are the big ideas and essential questions. The big idea is the conceptual understanding that are written as full sentence that help us determine when the students have made connections and draw conclusions long after instruction takes place. And I felt as a group we did as good a job as any of understanding that concept of how big ideas are conceptual, and spent a lot of time making those really solid that then become the answers to our essential questions. What will be the type of engaging, open-ended questions that will lead students to the big ideas. And can they be sharply focused on the curriculum and our instruction, which means at times they're focused on the topics. They're topical type items, or other times they're broad, depending upon how we're looking at them. And I think several of you made some adjustments with them after you thought, okay, here's how I'm going to teach it. And certainly I'm looking forward to folks coming back and having, after a couple weeks away, a chance to go, now I've thought a little bit deeper. And while my central question was a little bit general, now I understand how I'm going to teach it. I'll just walk us through a couple of examples. These were some that I shared last time. So what's in red is our essential question. What's in blue is our big idea. So our essential question, why is it important to analyze multiple pieces of empirical data? Determining, actually I think that one got cut off, and I apologize for that, but I think it's when determining a central idea and determining an opinion. Then you see the big idea here, analyzing varying points of view from multiple accounts of an event helps me form my own opinion. So I'm forming my own opinion. It's important to analyze multiple pieces to make that a strong conclusion. We also talked about how the essential questions could start off here. How does heat affect the motion of particles? And then think, you know what? I got an idea. Or my lesson is going to involve Play-Doh and a refrigerator becomes topical. And then you see the big idea. Why is Play-Doh harder to play with after it's been in the refrigerator? Because heat has changed those particle movements. Now, just the students saying heat changes particle movements isn't yet enough. They're going to demonstrate that conceptually by responding that in the refrigerator, particle movements got slower and tighter, and that's why it got harder. So again, the big idea can be more concise here as we elaborate it out in some of their student responses. We're going to talk and how we work this into our assessment design. We don't have to be overly detailed yet because that is really the conceptual understanding. Heat changes particle movement. Sometimes it makes it colder, it makes it tighter, sometimes it makes it move around more and become softer and become different on the other end of the spectrum. And the last thing we talked about was designing our post-assessment items, and how our big ideas and essential questions can help guide that to some degree. Then we talked mainly and did the activity on the mouse around selected response. Selected response are anytime the students choose or select their answer from a set of choices, often multiple choice, but certainly it can involve matching, true, false, and even a fill in the blank with a provided answer bank. Constructed response when students have to elicit their own ideas and construct or develop their own response. Sometimes they can be short responses, which are individual words or phrases. We don't necessarily need a scoring guide for that. When we get into short paragraphs, we might begin to need a simple scoring guide, which I've shared some examples. We're going to go back to this. The extended constructed response, though, multiple sentences or paragraphs, often will need a more detailed scoring guide. We talked also about not making it so detailed that it confuses the students and causes more work for us as the teacher. But if they're going to have to construct their response and there's a chance for more than one right answer, that's where the focus scoring guide, or what we might have called rubrics, will come into play. I'm going to walk us through just a few examples, again, of some of the item writing we talked about. First thing, and one of the steps that we'll come back to on day 4, is step 8, where we analyze our items and review our items for quality. And here what we're saying is to determine two or more central ideas in the text. Well, choice C does not align to that. And the bold print at the top highlights that that's the only part of the standard this question is addressing, because you really can't provide an objective summary with a multiple choice. But I can begin to determine if students can determine 2 or more central ideas. And so an opportunity to change careers only being one is one that they could easily eliminate. And so we would want to adjust that item to have 2 choices. A couple science examples. Determine the likelihood of the appearance of a specific trait in offspring given the genetic makeup of the parents. What is the chance that 2 people both being carriers for sickle cell will have the child with the disease? Now, it's implied here that the student must understand what being a carrier is. So we've got our 4 choices, pretty straightforward, pretty standard, and we can see it aligns to that particular standard. Here's another one, similar to that standard. Determine the likelihood of appearance of a specific trait in an offspring given the genetic makeup of the parents. The female carrier for hemophilia marries a man with hemophilia. What is the probability she will have a daughter with hemophilia? Have our 4 choices. Now, one thing that we also talked about, in this particular standard, it says given the genetic makeup of the parents. So this item isn't bad. this item does align with it, but there would be nothing wrong with giving the students the genetic makeup to allow them to have it in front of them to do the Punnett square, which leads them a little bit into the X-linked and Y-linked traits and gives them that little bit of a support there. Nothing wrong with that. And so this is where, as a teacher, we might say, for sure, this might be a midpoint check, possibly on our post-assessment. Or maybe we say that on the post-assessment, I'm not going to give it to them and see how they do. So again, that's where we have to use that verbiage of the standard. We talked a little bit about plan and conduct an investigation versus conduct an investigation where the students wouldn't have to plan it, which was one of the other standards. So that's why we can really make sure our assessments align with that. And here we have not lowered the level of rigor for how the standard is written. Finally, though, and this is the real kind of essential part that we focused on at the end of day 2, was the distractor analysis. Making sure that all the choices are not only plausible if possible, but they would allow us to determine when students get it wrong, a level of student misunderstanding. So here you see not only do we have the choices, but also what some possible inferences would be. In the next webinar, I'm going to highlight just how we can place that into the template, but that's an easy adjustment in terms of where we put it into the template for formatting and things. The key is that are we gathering the right kind of inferences from these incorrect choices that our students are giving us. And then finally, when we're developing our multiple choice items, what are some considerations? And Appendix M had a nice long list, and these were just some of the ones that I highlighted during the day for us to consider. But if you've just gotten them down, to be honest, that's what I would encourage us to do, because we can go back on step 8 and review for quality. Certainly the more ideas that we have going in, the better. We'll have less review to do. But when we're writing items for the first time, it's more important that we don't get caught up in the formatting, because we can always come back and adjust that. So we talked a little bit about what we were going to accomplish by the end of the day on day 2. And hopefully at this stage, you've been able to get 4 or 5 multiple choice items, 2 constructive response items, if at all possible. And if that's what's completed coming into Monday, I really think we're going to have a really good chance to not only have some of the new learning take place, which I'm going to highlight in one of the short webinars here in a moment, that you'll have to look at before, but also time to work. And if you have to go back and complete a little bit of the steps you haven't finished all the way, I think we should have no problem to accomplish that. Look forward to seeing everybody very, very soon. Have a safe trip into Pierre on Monday or Sunday evening, which most of you I would imagine are coming in on. And I look forward to seeing you then. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll see everybody Monday.